So exactly 4:15 will kickstart, and it's almost 4:15. So once it's exactly 4:15, we just kickstart.
Okay.
Abanu, please also share with your peers. You're closer with the young ones. Please inform them, your peers, let them join. This is a very good learning webinar for them. So please, everyone, just share with your peers so people can join in more. Thank you. All right. I think it's about that time. Okay. All right. It's 4:15 on the dot, and so we should start at this time. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For Mr. Tom, I think it's morning for you over there. Still morning for you. Good morning, the United States.
Good morning. Good
this
afternoon.
is another webinar. So this is another webinar. I think this is the first webinar for the 2021-2022 calendar year for this executive, and it's a great privilege to have you kickstart this webinar. And we believe that today is going to be a very interesting time. We're going to learn a whole lot. Every time you come on board to share something with us, it's always a very insightful and educative time. So it's a privilege to have you, and we also appreciate you for making our time to be here. So on this note, I'll hand the baton to my President Shehu Kabri, to give us the opening remark. Thank you very much. So,
thank you,
Mr. President. Over to you.
Okay. Let me just share my video. Good evening. Thank you, coordinator. Good evening, fellow professional colleagues who have joined this webinar session and those about to join. I will start by expressing my joy and happiness over Mr. Tom Kramer, whom did not only accept to do this webinar for Nigerian chapter, but have scheduled 3 upcoming webinars with different professional experts. This indeed our way song. Thank you, Mr. Tom. We appreciate your benevolence. I will also appreciate my president-elect for his forthright thought and innovation. Wow. My ESCO is one indivisible digit with the sole aim of making sure we align with ASSP global requirements and professional development of our members and intending members, and make the environment a safe place, hence the topic of this evening webinar. Thank you. Remain focused as we learn from Mr. Tom words of wisdom. Good evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
All right. You want to say something? You can go ahead. We wanted to acknowledge that.
No, go ahead. No.
All right.
No,
thank you very much.
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that. And we really appreciate it. And I believe Mr. Tom also appreciates it. So we will not bore anybody with long talk. We'll just go straight to why we're here, learning and everything about learning. So before I fully introduce the floor to a friend of Nigeria, one that loves Nigeria so passionately, I would like to give you a brief background of Mr. Tom. So you have that grasp of who is coming to talk to you today. Mr. Tom is as I said earlier, is a very passionate person when it comes to transferring knowledge. He's also the managing principal with LJB Inc. And also a registered professional in engineering. Mr. Tom is a certified safety professional from an education background. He has both bachelor's and a master's degree in engineering, as well as a master of business administration. Mr. Tom chairs the Ansi Z359 full committee on fall protection and on fall protection. Previously, he was the chair of 3 other Ansi and subcommittee. Mr. Tom is the president of the International Society for Fall Protection and serve as an at-large board member for the American Society of Safety Professionals. Here he's going to present to us on a very important topic: fall protection, regulation, navigating changes in fall protection, regulation, and standards. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Toms.
Thank you very much, MD, for that introduction, and thank you all for joining me this afternoon. It always brings great pleasure to talk to your group, and while I wasn't able to attend the conference in 2020 due to the pandemic, I hope to be out there sometime. So to make sure that I'm closer to you, I'm wearing the beautiful scarf that somebody shared with me a couple years ago. So thank you very much, and hopefully this will bring us closer as we talk through this. As MD mentioned, I'm also an at-large director for the American Society of Safety Professionals, and I also just wanted to share, I know that there are some items that are moving ahead relative to our governance documents. If there's anything that I can do to help out with communicating on that or answering any questions now or later on that, I'm more than welcome. But let's go ahead and get started on our topic today on fall protection. I have about 50 to 60 minutes of material presented, but I also do have the chat box open. So as questions come in and I see them in the chat box, I will address those questions and make sure that I answer any questions that you have, and I'll make sure I stay on until I answer all the questions that you have. Let's go ahead and get into our topic as far as navigating changes in regulations and fall protection regulations and standards. And so my bottom line up front is that this is a lot of a viewpoint from the United States. And so as I share this information, I want to bring some of the lessons learned that we've had here in the United States and share it with you as ways that possibly you can take some of those lessons learned and apply them to your programs over there in Nigeria and wherever else you may go in the world, because I think there's a lot of lessons learned that we can share, and as we better protect our workers at heights. And so as part of my bottom line up front is that in the United States, we really haven't truly addressed the real risk and exposures and fall protections. And I'll share what I mean by that in a little bit. And I think one fundamental item, no matter where we're at, whether we're in the United States, whether we're in Nigeria, whether we're in Singapore, wherever we're at around the world, the regulations and standards and equipment advances help, but we need to have a new mindset when it comes to fall protection to best protect our workers at heights. And so one action item that you might think about, and I have down here meeting the new regulations, but what I mean as far as just making sure that you're meeting your regulations and constantly with the constant changes of items, including small items like stairs and ladders, hopefully you can take a look at that and see how it might apply to your organization to make sure that you're doing the most you can to protect your workers at height. Another thing from an action item that you might take away from this presentation, in addition to your own notes, is to evaluate your equipment inventory. And whether you're meeting the Ansi standards or the EN standards or other standards bodies, just make sure that your equipment is up to date with those standards. Oftentimes when I'm out in the field, I see equipment that is very, very outdated, that's very, very worn, and it is not fit for service for the workers that are using it. And if you don't have your equipment up to date, develop that plan, work with your organization's management and leadership to create that plan to move things forward. So my agenda today is to give a little background how I view the area of working at heights with a little bit of a view from here in the United States, but then also how you can take some of those lessons learned, as I mentioned, and improve your programs in Nigeria. From that, I'll talk about some new items related to some changes in our OSHA regulations. Again, I'm sharing that as ways to look at best practices that you can incorporate into your regulations for your organization. Then I'll talk about the Ansi standards. And the reason why I want to focus on the Ansi standards is because this is a standards body where the American Society of Safety Professionals is the secretariat. And so I think it provides a lot of great intellectual property that all ASSP members can benefit from. And so when I think about the entire, all the members within the American Society of Safety Professionals, everything that the society does needs to start and end with a safety professional like yourself. So as we have all of our ASSP members, we then come together in our chapters, we come together in our common interest groups, we come together in our practices and standards, and for example, in the Z359 committee, and they create intellectual property by talking in situations like this, or when we're at the conference in Austin in a couple of weeks, and that creates the intellectual property, and then we get together in sessions like today or others to share that information for professional development reasons, and that information then makes us all better members. The questions that you ask me make me a better member. Some of the points that I share with you and the answers that I share with you make you a better member. And then that just increases the value of the profession and allows us to make sure that our workers out there in the field get home safely. Then I'll have some final closing words to share with that. So again, I'll keep an eye on I have the window open up here with the questions, so feel free to ask questions as we move along. But let's go ahead and get started with the content. So I'll give you a little history of fall protection here in the United States since 1995. And the reason why I share the year 1995 is because that's when our first significant fall protection regulation, what we call our construction regulation subpart M, came into effect. And I'll just simply ask you to think about this for a minute. Why do our regulators make regulations, especially in the area of safety and health? Why do we do that? Well, we obviously simply do it to save lives, whether it's to prevent people from fatalities or serious injuries or even less than serious injuries. So we create those regulations in order to save lives, but simply by the regulators making the regulations, that doesn't save lives. It's the people that are involved in this call, us going out to the field, talking with the workers, doing the training, the equipment manufacturers bringing their new goods to you to say our new equipment is safer for these reasons, us talking about regulations like this. Those sorts of things allow us to create a safer work environment. So the regulators, while their work is important, it's really up to us to make sure that we're doing the good work to protect our workers at height. So here's the data from the United States since 1995. And so as you look at this data, you look at the numbers and say, wow, the numbers have not dropped relative to fatalities. Our fatalities continue to rise. And I think this is a very important fact that we need to keep in mind, is that if we create regulations, but the fatalities are not decreasing, we need to look at ourselves and say, what do we need to do differently? Now, you see the data went down in the year 2009 and 2010, and I'm sure many of us remember what the world was like in 2009 and 2010. We were suffering through the global recession. And so if our data only goes down due to recessions, that's not a good way to manage the number of fatalities. And so it's something that we need to be very focused on in how we do this. And so some other data that I'll share with you relative to what's happening in the United States over this over 20-year period was that not only did we have more regulations developed over this time period, but we've also increased the number of Ansi standards quite a bit. Also, the amount of fall protection equipment, the harnesses and lanyards that we talk about so often, that went from about a $300 million industry to an $800 million industry and closing in on $1 billion. So there's not a shortage of equipment. And fall protection has been the #1 citation by our Osha for the past 10 years. So when we have more regulations, more standards, more citations, more equipment, and then at the same time our overall workplace fatalities have decreased, those items should say that our fall fatalities should decrease. But as you can see from the data, they have not. And that's something that as the chair of the Z359 standards and my work in fall protection, I have to figure out why that's not happening, and we need to change that tide. One other way that I often look at this is by looking at comparing ourselves with another country, a like country. So I'll use the United Kingdom since in many ways we're similar to the United Kingdom. When you look at us from a population and an economy standpoint, we're obviously a larger economy and a larger population than the United Kingdom. However, when you look down to bottom line where we have the total number of fall fatalities, in the year 2016, we had 849, while they had only 25. And so you look at those numbers, and when you look at how much different they are, we're not a 33 times or 34 times larger country than the United Kingdom, but that's how many more fatalities we have. And while there's slight differences as far as how we count serious injuries and fatalities in the United Kingdom, that doesn't make up for the differences in these numbers. So after you correct for population, after you correct for size of the economy, we still have quite a bit of more fatalities in the United Kingdom. And that's something that I need to take a look at what they're doing in the United Kingdom and say, what can we do better in order to protect our workers at height? And one of the biggest improvements that you can take away and that you can immediately apply to your organization is a standard from the American Society of Safety Professionals. It's Ansi Z359.2. That was first published in 2017 and will likely have a new version of that published next year. And what that does is it creates the key and core elements of a health and safety program that you can incorporate. And as very, very similar to quality, you can use the plan, do, study, act model that Edward Deming came out with years and years ago in order to continually improve your processes for your organization. So the great news when you're working for your organization is that you don't have to incorporate everything in the first year. You can just start addressing little bits and pieces in order to make your program better. So why do falls continue to occur? Why is this still an issue? And I think these items pertain not only in the United States, but also they pertain all around the world. First off, the fall happens very, very quickly. Whenever you're talking with someone that's gone for a fall, they mention that they fall down so quickly that they don't even remember slipping. And so you can see through the physics here is that you'll fall 6 feet in just 0.6 of a second, and you're just now slightly moving your body and so forth. And so what you're going to grab onto is now 6 feet above you, and so you can't simply grab onto that. Plus, you're moving at about 20 feet per second, which is definitely very, very challenging as far as trying to stop yourself from falling. And so many people think that they could really catch themselves from a fall, but they really cannot. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is that fall protection is not your average personal protective equipment. And I'm sure this is a challenge that you face over there in Nigeria also, as far as people putting on the fall protection equipment in an incorrect way. And the way I ask you to think about this is first off, think about the different types of personal protective equipment that you use in the workplace. I'm sure you're thinking about your hard hats and your safety glasses, goggles maybe, and boots and so forth. For each of those items, everyone wears some version of that on a very, very common basis. We all wear glasses, whether they're prescription glasses or whether they're sunglasses or something like that. We all wear shoes at some point, so putting on safety shoes is not as much of a challenge. But how many of us wear a full body harness outside of our workplace? Excuse me. Not many of us do. And so what that does is that creates, I'm sorry, I have a cough here, hold on. So what it does is it creates a challenge as far as properly fitting our equipment. And proper fit of harnesses, as you can see in this picture here, is not easy and something that we have to focus on throughout our workplaces. So when it comes to protecting our workers, we need to ask ourselves, do we have few falls because we're lucky or because we're good? And what we have now with the Ansi Z359 standard is that we have a better way to make sure that we're good as far as protecting our workers at heights. Let me go ahead and proceed on with this and first talk about some of our evolving standards. The first item to keep in mind is that Osha and Ansi here in the United States are much different. Osha is our regulator, while Ansi serves as what we call consensus voluntary standard. We have experts in the area of fall protection that get together at least twice a year during our full committee meetings and look to establish where should the fall protection requirements be, more than what the regulators say, but what should it be? And so you can see a couple of different bullet points related to each program. And so I'll focus on both of those, giving examples of both of those, just so you can understand the regulatory framework that we have over here and see how you can use some of it over there in Nigeria. Let's start with the OSHA regulations. First off, some background on our OSHA regulations is they first originated back in 1971. So getting close to, I guess it's now, since we're in 2021, it was 50 years ago. And they looked at making updates as early as 1990. But unfortunately, due to a variety of reasons, it took over 26 years to get those regulations finally updated and published in ours. We often make jokes about our federal regulations as far as how slow they move. And this is just a great example where they had the regulation first proposed back in 1990, but it took until 2016 for it to actually be published. And so what they wanted to do with the new regulation is they wanted to make sure that they were addressing some of the best practices in the area of fall protection. They want to address, advances in our fall protection equipment, where you can see in the picture here, in days of old, many workers used body belts, and now we're more often using full body harnesses. They also wanted to create consistency between our construction regulation and our manufacturing or our factory or general industry regulation, as we call it. And so those were some obviously positive things that they want to do. But what I did as I submitted one of my comments for the regulatory changes is I said, you're making a regulation that is maybe consistent to a regulation that isn't as effective as it should be. And so why make a new regulation effective to something that doesn't work? Unfortunately, they said I didn't provide enough data in my comments, so they didn't regard it. But the point is that we need to keep in mind is that consistency is good, but consistency against something that's not working just makes two things that are not working. And so, unfortunately, I think that's something we're struggling with here in the United States about that. So hopefully that's one lesson learned that you can take, is that as your regulatory framework changes over there, really question yourself whether or not the regulation is going to work. And if not, why is it not working? And what can you compare it to say whether or not it's going to work? So as I move on, here's a timeline of just some of the changes, just so see how quickly this regulation is implemented. It was published in 2016, in very, very late 2016. It became effective 60 days later. And then it had some employee training requirements that were required immediately. And then it had some other items that go into the next couple of years after that. Not very many things were grandfathered. Oftentimes when we think about regulations being put in place, we talk about whether or not those standards are grandfathered in, and there was not much grandfathered in relative to this regulation. It was something that unfortunately meant for the facilities, many of them required it to be right here. And so as you think about fall protection, one item that often comes into play is that, are we truly protecting our workers at height, or are we simply just providing them some equipment? And so these are some common phrases that as you implement your regulations from a lessons learned standpoint, you might think about how you're having those conversations in the field, because I'm sure some workers will occasionally come say to you, well, you know what, I'll be careful when I'm there. When I'm working at heights, I'll be careful. I don't need this equipment. Well, it's not about being careful. It's about making sure that we're properly protecting you. And while we want all of our workers to be careful, we also want them to be properly protected. Some other times workers will say, well, I'm not that high. Maybe they're only, 3 meters or 5 meters or so, and they think to themselves, well, I'll just be not only be careful, but I'm not that high. Well, again, we have our thresholds where fall protection is required for our organizations, and we have to follow that. Oftentimes they'll say, well, it'll just take me a minute. I'll just go there to the edge, I'll do the work, and I'll come back and I'll be careful. I'm not that high, and it'll just take a minute. But again, a lot of our regulations aren't built into determining or into using just a brief amount of time for that work out there. And then we also have situations where somebody says, well, at least I have a harness on. And as we saw in one of the previous pictures, the worker did have a harness on, but he didn't have it on properly, and he was still unprotected. And then the final one is just because they're tied off doesn't mean they're protected, and it's something that we want to keep in mind about that. So as we continue on the OSHA regulations, one thing that I think OSHA did very, very well, and something that you can take to your workplaces, is how do you view the hazards when you're out on your job sites? What are the ways, the lenses that you can be looking at to make sure you're identifying all the hazards? And the first item I would recommend you think about is think about the integrity of the service. Sometimes people talk about the fragile roofs, or they talk about other surfaces that could collapse because it's not strong enough. And so is the integrity of the surface, because maybe it's not strong enough, or maybe it's been weakened due to corrosion or other deterioration, is that surface that you're standing on strong enough? So that's the first lens that you should be looking at as you're going on to the around your workplace. The second area that you look at, in this picture here is of an unprotected roof edge, are there areas where you have a duty to protect your workers? And one area that OSHA did very, very well is they identified 14 areas where you have a duty to provide fall protection. They have unprotected sides and edges like you see here in this picture. They talk about holes and other floor openings. Wall openings is another example. They talk about hoist areas. If you're hoisting material up to a platform or onto a roof, you need to protect the employees in that hoist area. But then they also have a last item, a catch-all phrase, is that they say all other working surfaces not previously addressed. And so but at least that provides you some comprehensiveness to look at your workplaces. Where do I think somebody could fall based on these requirements, and how do I need to protect them? And how you protect them really falls into that third category. And the reason why I put that into different types of hazards is because not all your systems are compliant, and that's where your tuned eye as far as what the regulations actually require is very, very helpful to your organizations to identify where those systems are. Do you have proper documentation? How are you comparing what's installed versus what is required to make sure that the worker is still safe? Because as I said before, many times people are tied off using their fall protection equipment. They're attached to their anchorage, but they're not necessarily safe. And a great example associated with that is from a rescue standpoint. If the worker is using fall protection equipment and they're tied off and they fall and they're suspended, and you cannot get them down in a timely manner, they're tied off, but they're not safe. And if you don't get them down in a timely manner, it could result in a serious injury or worse. And that's what we want to make sure that we plan out during the early stages of our fall protection program. One other good item that OSHA talked about in their regulation that I think is completely appropriate for your organization to think about is the training requirements. Who needs to have training requirements, and what are the training requirements that are in place? Well, here in the United States, that went into effect immediately back in May of 2017, although I would say many organizations are still looking at implementing that. But you want to make sure that you have general training for exposure, because you want to make sure that all employees understand what fall exposures are and make sure that they don't unduly expose themselves to those items. Another common example, not only here in the United States, but I'm sure in Nigeria as well as around the world, are roof exposures. When people are on roofs, how are they exposed to fall hazards? And so if you have workers going up there for a variety of reasons, not only for roof maintenance, but if you have equipment on the roof, or if you have telecommunications equipment that's on the roof, making sure that they're aware of those hazards on the roof is a key item. Making sure that they're trained properly on the use of equipment. I can get into more details like this if people have questions or things that I can clarify, and also touch on this a little bit when I get into the Ansi Standards portion of this, but making sure that they're trained on proper pieces of equipment is very fundamental in this. And then we have 3 different levels of training that people often go through. That would be the authorized person, the person that's using the fall protection equipment, the competent person training, and they are the people that are supervising the use of the fall protection equipment. And then you have the qualified person training, the people that are designing the fall protection systems. As India talked about at the beginning, I have not only a professional engineering, but also I'm a certified safety professional. So I serve many of my clients as that qualified person as I design their fall protection systems. I can look at it not only from the structural engineering aspect, but also the behavioral aspect and the training and the equipment specification and the procedures and so forth as a certified safety professional. One common item here in the United States is roof edge fall protection. At what point do you need protection when you're on the roof? And so I think this is a great lesson learned as far as if you're not using something like this already, you can incorporate this into your regulations in your organizations over in Nigeria. And so what we say here in the United States is that if the work is infrequent and temporary, that as long as I'm staying 15 feet away or about 5 meters away from the roof edge, I don't need to have fall protection in place. But as I get closer to that roof edge, obviously, then you need to have that protection. And that when you get within that first within that first 6 feet from the edge, then you have to have either a personal fall protection system or guardrail or a safety net to protect the worker because they are that close to the hazards. And so these are some great best practices that you can think about when you're working within your organizations and also talking about others in the industry. So just to clarify one item real quick here as far as what is temporary and infrequent, these give some definitions. These are things that you can bring into your organization just to clarify when the workers are there. You can also, let me go to the next page. You can also, when the work is not infrequent and temporary, then you want to provide more protection. If people are doing a longer project on the roof, you want to make sure that they're better protected because it's less likely that they're going to be able to use those other means to properly protect them. Go ahead and go to the next slide here on our assessments. So one item that our new regulation requires that would be a great best practice to see how you're doing this in your organization is how are you assessing your workplace? And so this is just a new requirement within our OSHA regulations. It's been required by Ansi for at least 14 years now, but OSHA has now adopted the requirement to do that assessment of your workplace. And so one question I would ask you is how are you assessing your workplace for hazards? And going back to that previous slide where I talked about the different types of hazards, the integrity of the work surface, the duty to have fall protection, and then the systems criteria, thinking about those items as you're going through your facilities, as you're going through your construction sites, I think would be very, very helpful. And again, the key is proactive hazard identification, because especially in the area of fall protection, when someone is identifying a hazard, they need to have significant systems in place to protect them. They'll need harnesses and self-retracting devices and anchorages and rescue plans. And if the workers show up on a Monday to do that work and they don't have that equipment in place, they're more likely to just get the project started without putting that equipment in place. And so it's an important item that they can keep in mind as you're using your equipment and identifying the hazards. So it's a continuum as you identify the hazards. That initial survey of hazards really leads to you to identify the correct means of personal protective equipment. And after you identify and select those correct pieces of personal protective equipment, now you can better communicate to your workers what the PPE is to be used for, how it shouldn't be used, and what are all the processes and training and procedures associated with that. And one of those key items is proper fit. And this is something where I'm very, very passionate about, is making sure that you have a proper fit of the harness is one key. And if you're not doing that within your organization, please let me know and I can talk about this. So let me go back. I saw George had in a question. This is only for flat roofs. So George, partially it's only for flat roofs. Here in the United States, we talk about the difference between steep roofs and flat roofs. And so we take the ratio of the rise of the roof versus the run. And so for every 12 inches, if your rise is less than 4 inches or less, then we consider it a low slope or a flat roof. So that item does only apply to flat roofs and low slope roofs. So as long as the rise is less than 4 inches over 12 inches, then it's okay. For steep roofs, so it's greater than 4 inches over that 12 inches. For steep roofs, you're not allowed to use the warning line. So let me go back a couple slides just for his sake, for George's sake. So this area where we talk about the designated warning line, that is not an option once we get our slope greater than 4 inches over that 12 inches. So George, thank you very much for that question. Hopefully I answered you clearly. If not, please type something in and I'll come back there to make sure that I get that clarified. But again, thank you, George, for asking that question. Oh, I see a thumbs up, so I'll give you a thumbs up back, George. Thank you again. Let's go ahead and get back to so this one. So the next item from a documentation standpoint, it's always good to know what you did the assessment of, who did it, and when the assessment was performed. Now, whether you show the assessment to the regulators, that'll be up to your local requirements, but it's not something that's required over here, and it's just the key documentation to record these items. One other item, and you can see just hopefully the comical picture here in the slide. This is obviously not something you can do, but unfortunately it's items that we've seen here in the past where somebody is simply tying the rope around a waist and having somebody hold in them. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I like being so tall, because I'm never the one that would be going out there. Of course, that's a joke. We wouldn't do things like that. But in this case, OSHA has really started to take a very keen eye, and this is the lesson learned that I hope that you guys take away from this portion. They've taken a keen eye on anchorages, and they're raising their requirements on the anchorage. And when they raise the requirements, what I'm talking about is they're requiring more documentation for that anchorage. How do they know that it was properly designed? How do they know that it's been it still has adequate strength? And where and who prepared that documentation? So this is the one key. And the one thing I want to emphasize that as you're talking with others in your organizations, the key isn't to focus on the documentation. The documentation doesn't protect the worker, but the act of preparing the documentation is what helps protect the worker. So as you prepare that documentation, you'll find gaps, and those gaps will allow you to better communicate it to the worker, allow them to better understand how they need to use that anchorage and how they can stay safe while they're using the anchorage. And if they were to fall, how do they get down safely? And so this is a very, very fundamental part of our fall protection systems is the documentation. In the United States here, we're using fewer and fewer what we call improvised anchorages, anchorages that the worker simply self-identifies and people tie off to without much thought. And it's something that as I look broadly across the world, that's something in the United Kingdom. One of the big differences between our regulations and the United Kingdom's regulations is that they have fewer improvised anchorages, and they actually also use fall protection equipment much less than the United States. And so again, this is a lesson learned that hopefully you can apply there, is that the less that you use fall protection equipment, the safer you'll be. And I don't mean that in ways that you don't allow the person to have protection. It's that rather than using personal protective equipment or harnesses and lanyards, you have other ways to protect the workers, such as guardrails and scaffolding and other things to properly protect the worker. So do we need to test our anchorages is the question I often get, again, regardless where I'm at in the world. Do we need to test our anchorages? And in many cases, you do not. As a structural engineer, as a professional engineer, I'm not often testing all the building systems that I design. We have another practice in LJB, the company where I work, that does a lot of building design. And I'm sure you're familiar with the company Amazon, and we've designed a lot of buildings for them. But we don't go through and we don't test all the pieces of structure that we design. We have visual inspections, visual reviews that we do, but we don't necessarily test those items. And the same goes with anchorages. Now, in some cases, you will want to do some testing. That's very, very obvious if you don't have the understanding of the material properties and you don't have any drawings as far as what that material is. Yes, you might need to do testing in a limited circumstance, but that's in a very, very limited situation where you need to do that testing of the anchorages. One other item that changed that affects a lot of our construction projects, that could affect a lot of your infrastructure projects and your big construction projects in Nigeria is just changes to design regulations, not only for stairs, but also for ladders. And so this is something that's very, very critical, that in order to make sure that you're not creating more hazards in the future, this is a great time to make sure that to go through your internal regulations, your organization specifications, to make sure that the way that you're requiring ladders and stairs to be created, that you're doing that in a compliant manner. One thing that we've started to change here in the United States that you can also consider as a best practice or a consideration is that we're no longer counting on cages to protect our workers as they go up ladders. So let's think about it this way. How does a cage stop you from falling? Well, it doesn't. You know, if you think about how the person is going up the ladder, if they were to fall back, all the cage is going to do is it's going to deflect them, and then they're going to, you know, rattle as they fall down, but they're still going to hit the ground. As we jokingly say in our training, all the cage does is funnel the splat. You know where to find the worker, and they're not going to hit with their head and their neck and their back. They're probably going to hit with their legs. But the challenge is as a person is falling through that ladder, there's opportunities for arms and legs and so forth to get caught in that ladder and cause another significant injury. And so what our OSHA requirements have changed is that once that ladder once the fall from the ladder gets greater than 24 feet, then you need to have what we call a ladder climbing system, or some sort of an anchorage over top of it. And so again, a best practice that you want to think about. Another best practice based on our new regulations from our standards is chains are no longer allowed to be used at the tops of ladders. We have to have self-closing, swinging, or sliding gates in order to protect those workers. So again, another item to think about. And then the last item from the OSHA regulation update is the new snap hook gate strength. and this is something, again, that you can consider for yours. As you can see here with the snap hook on the left-hand side, this snap hook meets the old standard, whereas the snap hook on the right-hand side meets the new requirement. So you can see the new snap hook is much beefier, and you can see that gate on the snap hook is much, much stronger. So previously it only had to pass a couple 100 pounds to the gate. Now it has several thousand pounds, 3,600 pounds actually, that it has to have as far as to support the gate. I just noticed something on my screen. I have some sort of a line here. That's not something I put on there, so I apologize if that's interfering with anybody viewing the slides. It's something that tried to click on something to try to get it off, but I haven't been able to figure out how to do that. So I apologize if that's interfering with somebody reading something, but I will send out these slides to Dr. Okondo and Kabir and MD to make sure that they have this information. Let's go ahead and move on out of the OSHA regulations into the Ansi Standards updates. Oops, I went ahead a couple slides. Just want to look at something here. So I just have a couple slides to orient you on the Ansi Standards and to give you some thoughts to think about before I close. But again, keep the questions coming in. If anybody needs to follow up afterwards, I do want to mention that I'll provide my cell phone number. I am available on WhatsApp. Kabir and I have exchanged several text messages via WhatsApp. So if you're coming over here in the United States for the ASSP conference like Dr. Okondo is, or otherwise, feel free to text me. And I'd love to see you, even if we just are asking questions and going back and forth. Let's go ahead and start with the Ansi Standards update. So our Ansi Standards started all the way back to 1992, well before I got involved in the industry. I started working at LJB back in 1995. Had several things in those mid-90s areas. I got married in 1994, started a job in 1995, and our first son was born in 1997. So sometimes those dates get a little mixed up for me. But the Ansi Z359 standards started back in 1992, and really kept the same through about 2006. 2007 is when we had our first significant change to our Ansi standards, and really the big one that I'll talk about in a minute here is our Ansi Z359.2 standard. We've added a design standard and a component standard in 2009, and all throughout the, up through 2017, we had a significant change as far as updating our standards. So it's been updated. If you look at this timeline compared to the OSHA, we've significantly updated our standards, whereas OSHA is just very, very slowly updating their requirements. But the challenge with the ANSI standards is that all the standards are not the same. Rather than in the OSHA regulation where everything is contained within one regulation, different parts and so forth, but it's all together, we have different standards that focus on different things. So we have a standard that focuses on fall protection systems such as travel restraint systems and rescue systems. We have a standard that focuses on your fall protection program, the paperwork, the policy, the procedures, the training, and so forth. We have one that focuses for the engineers on the design of systems, that when I design a system for a client, I use that standard. We have a standard for qualification and testing. So how do manufacturers make sure that they're qualifying and testing and verifying the equipment in a consistent manner? And then finally, we have component standards, such as for the full body harness or the energy absorbing lanyard or the self-retracting devices or the anchorage connectors. So you can see is that all the standards are quite different, even though they're within one fall protection code through the American Society of Safety Professionals. So to give you an understanding as far as the framework for all the standards, I'm just going to show a couple of graphics here that help explain it. So really the key number that you can reference in your fall protection programs is ANSI Z359.1. When you reference ANSI Z359.1, you get everything that I'm going to talk about. And so as I talk about it, we need to first realize that there are product-based standards. And when I mean product-based standards, I'm talking about the products of harnesses, lanyards, self-retracting devices, anchorage connectors, and the such. But then we also have non-product standards, as I mentioned before. And so that's a good way to just kind of think about in your program. Yes, I need to be mindful of the pieces of equipment, but I also need to be mindful of my processes to make sure that I'm protecting my workers at height. So let's start with the non-product-based standards first. And the three that are very, very key is we have a system design standard. So again, that's the standard that the engineers are using to properly design their systems. Then we have the one for your managed programs. So that's the ones that you as safety professionals are using to make sure that your organization has a compliant program. And the key with this one is that this is the most unique one from around the world. There's no other standard that I've come across throughout my work that is focused this detailed on the core elements of a managed fall protection program. And the great news is that you don't have to implement the entire thing immediately. You can just take bits and pieces of it and apply it to your organization. So then here's the numbers associated with it. And again, these are available on the ASSP website. You just need to type in ASSP and then the code there, and you can see those. Now, this Z359.1 standard that describes everything that I'm sharing, it is available as a free download from the American Society of Safety Professionals. So that's one action item that I think I'll talk about at the end, as far as have you downloaded that free standard and have you downloaded that free resource. So now let's look at the product-based standards. So if we first started with the non-product-based standards, let's look at the product-based standards now. So we have what we call components, and so those would be the harnesses and the lanyards, as I mentioned several times. We also have the systems. So that would be a fall arrest system. That would be a work positioning system or a travel restraint system or a rescue system. What are the pieces and parts that come together to create a complete system for you? We have a couple of standards that we're still trying to phase out, but we still have a couple. And then finally, we have a qualification and verification testing standard that manufacturers use when they're testing the equipment. And there's, of course, the numbers related to those that you can reference for your employer. But you can see all the different numbers here that we have when it comes to the fall protection standards. And again, we have probably 12 to 15 different active standards at any one time. And we've had 4 released this year that I'll mention here shortly. Let's get into that point as far as what are the newest standards. As you remember from the timeline that I showed you relative to OSHA, it was a very, very broad timeline. Here it's much more narrow, and so you can see that there's quite a few standards that have come out at certain times. We had our first version of the Z359.6, I'm sorry, 0.1 that was published in 2016, and you can see the other standards that were put in. I mentioned the Z359.2, the Managed Fall Protection Program, that was last published in 2017, and I anticipate a new version of that coming out in the year of 2022. Let me go ahead and skip down to the bottom of this slide as far as the most recent standards. And in 2020, we had our fall protection code was updated. The Z359.1 standard was updated. So you can see that standard is in the is available again as the free download from the American Society of Safety Professionals. And you can see the 4 standards that we've published yet this year. We have Z359.11 for full body harnesses. That was published and was published in 2021. It will not become effective until next year. So the new equipment, the new harnesses made towards that standard aren't available now, but they'll be available shortly. We also have a new standard for self-retracting devices, the yo-yo type devices that some people refer those to. That was just published earlier this summer. And again, that will the equipment for that will become effective next year. Manufacturers, though, might start making it before then. So please be on the lookout for if your organization uses Ansi, that there's going to be new equipment coming out there. And then finally, for rope access, which is a very unique way of having it. Okay, so yes, I see your notes. So I will wrap up in just a couple minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. So thank you very much. I think it was MD that sent that, so appreciate that little comment in there. We have a rope access standard that came out just earlier this month, and it became effective right away. But that's a very, very unique area of fall protection, very, very much a niche service that you might have heard of the organizations IRATA, the International Rope Access Technicians Association, or SPRAT, the Society for Professional Rope Access Technicians. Those organizations really have quite a bit of additional detail when it comes to using rope access systems. And then finally, descenders, which are often used in rope access systems. Let me just touch on a couple future state items. Here are a couple of different projects that Ansi is also working on. But one key item, and I'll also send this over to the folks, to the president for your chapter and so forth and others. I'll send this gap analysis tool, because what this does is it takes the entire, dozens of pages within Z359.2, and it consolidates it down to 20 questions. And what it allows you to do, it allows you to do a gap analysis of your fall protection program. The American Society of Safety Professionals has a class that's a 3-day live version of this and a 5-week online version of this, where you not only get a copy of the standard, but you get to do a gap analysis of your organization, which then after the class, you can present that to your organization's leadership to do that gap analysis. And essentially, it allows you to identify what's your current state and what the desired state is. And then I see a question that just came in. Will the slides be available for the attendees? Yes, I will send a PDF of these slides to the chapter's leadership. I'll also do one PDF of this gap analysis tool that I'll mention to you, so that you'll be able to take that. So thank you very much for asking that question. And I just got two more slides here. There's a link for the course there. I'm going to go ahead and go past this twin link landing. So let me close by just saying, as I look here in the United States, this is the reality from our fall protection programs. We still have too many fatalities, even though we have more regulations, more standards, more equipment, and we have overall safer workplaces. And really, that's the part of that is based on us not doing enough gap analysis to work on the process of our programs versus just using equipment more. So as you think about as you think about your actions items as far as implementing some of what I shared, think about who is your team as far as updating your regulations. How are you prioritizing things? Because you can't do everything at once, because you need to figure out what needs to happen now versus what needs to happen later. And so again, these are some of the action items that I mentioned before. And as a closing exercise, I just ask that we think about it this way. Imagine that every year on May 22nd, and I'll get back to a second why I chose the year May 22nd, or I chose the day May 22nd. But on May 22nd at 10:15, all your workers simultaneously tested their fall protection systems. So they fell. And my ask of you is would that be a good day? Or are you hoping that you're lucky that day and the workers aren't injured? And the reason why I ask that is because your workers are out there using their fall protection systems, and we need to assume that they're going to fall in those. Now, for me, the reason why I chose the date May 22nd is for two reasons. One is that's in the future. So if there's anything that you need to fix, you have time now to fix that. You have time in the coming months to fix that, to protect those workers. Now, I'm not proposing that everyone jump on May 22nd, but you can just kind of think through this as a thought exercise. Now, for me, the reason why I chose May 22nd was back on May 22nd, 1998, I got a call from a safety director that we've done some work for. And they were building a water treatment facility in our state of Florida. And he told me that they had a fall. There was a worker working on top of a concrete wall about 6 to 7 meters in the air, 20 feet in the air. And the reinforcing steel sticks up out of the wall. And they take what they call a hickey bar, and they bend over the reinforcing so that it forms a horizontal element. And so they have to do that as far as in the construction process. And when he got to one of the bars, as he pushed, it slipped, and he fell headfirst down towards a concrete slab below. And he got caught by a horizontal lifeline I designed. And you talk about making your day, making you realize why the Lord put you on the earth. My goal from there has always been to find one life. And so whether it's through earlier presentations that I did this week with some organizations in my area. I actually had a presentation earlier this week with some folks from Saudi Aramco, where I was talking to them about it. And then obviously I'm talking with you about fall protection today. To me, every life is precious. And so as we were doing the dry run yesterday, he said, why are you so passionate? Well, about doing a presentation for us. Well, first off, because I'm passionate that you guys are willing to take time on a Saturday afternoon to do this material. That excites me. That makes me want to share as much as I can. And whether it's a life here in the United States or a life here in Nigeria, every life is precious to me. And if I can save a life over there or help you identify a need to save a life over there, that's what I want to do. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. As I mentioned, that's not the right phone number, but I'll go ahead and type in, as we're going through questions, I'll type in my mobile number, and you can feel free to reach out to me through WhatsApp. Consider me your fall protection phone a friend. I'd love to answer questions not only now, but also in the future. And if anyone's able to attend the conference in Austin in about a month and a half, I'd love to see you there too. So with that, I'm going to send back to the chapter's leadership. Go ahead. I think you're muted.
All right.
You're listening for protection. If there's all the components. Hello?
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, fall protection is one of the critical fatality exposure areas in most industries, especially when the industries has high exposures in their work programs. Especially when I listened to you and you dived on the social influence and the lies associated with it. Yes, I'm going to work. Yes, I've been doing this work. Oh, I'm sure that I have enough protection myself. I'm both body and mind so stabilized to do the work. These are some of the things immediately while at work, and I go to the side and I ask somebody, I said, are you really sure of what you're going to do today? Mm-hmm. I said, yes, I have all my kits ready. I know what I'm going to do. I said, how about if something goes wrong? No, nothing will go wrong. I said, why? How do you think something won't go wrong? Have you thought about the weather? If I asked you how you feel, how do you feel? Most times, these are some of the areas for us to take. And I sincerely thank you so much for touching it, because these are some of the gaps that, if it is not well knitted, could result to unpleasant events during work activities at height.
Yes,
so
Demiria,
I sincerely... Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing them anymore. Let me just build on that a little bit. The way I like to think about it is that
I sincerely thank you. As
when
they
you're
have talked about, they have on some of the next, all the new improvements they have done. Go ahead.
I didn't. Oh yes, thank you. So what I heard from you is a very, very common item that I like to think about is that, you know, when we're using fall protection equipment, we're often one mistake away from a fatality. And you know, I think to myself, you know, how many mistakes did I make? Well, I made one mistake at the beginning where I was on the wrong Zoom call to start it out. So everyone here was over here. Dr. Okundo and I were on the other link. And so I made that mistake. And, you know, if my wife, Tracy, she came in here, she was like, well, you forgot about these other mistakes that you already made. And the point is as humans, we will make mistakes. I guarantee you, I'll make mistakes every day of my life. But the point is that when we're using fall protection, how are we making sure that our systems are robust enough that when that worker makes a mistake, and like you said, if you don't have a bad day or if you have the weather that comes up, right? Sometimes it's a mistake that's not even in your control. How do you know that you're still going to be alive? And that's what we're looking at here. So thank you very much for bringing that up. That's very, very important, and I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. We sincerely appreciate. I actually enjoyed this presentation.
Thank you.
Thank
you. I think Festus has his hand up. You wanna jump in, Festus?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I don't know if I can go ahead with question now.
Please do. Yes. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Tom. It's been very insightful. Always having you around is always very good to know. From your presentation, actually, what actually excited me most is in the area of the new assessment requirements, which Osha actually passed out regarding the workplace assessment. Is a very good one. I guess it's a proactive hazard identification, as it were. My own take on this new regulations and standards is in the area of training for especially these people who are exposed workers and equipment users. I don't actually know what the requirement is saying at the moment regarding that, because oftentimes you see some persons, they want to go and work at height. They will tell you, okay, the responsibility of being trained is actually the purview, or it rests on the scaffold team and what have you. But again, oftentimes you see welders, you see erectors and what have you also getting on the height work, as it were. So I'm just looking at what was the regulations saying as regards training both the exposed workers and the equipment users. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, Festus, for that, and I'll give a couple different ways to answer that question as far as, you know, what are the training requirements. And so relative to the OSHA regulations, they require training on two different items. One is what is the hazards that you're exposed to, and then secondly, what are the equipment that you're using. So how are you how are you training them to make sure that they're aware of those issues out in the field, and then whatever you use to protect them, how are you training them on that properly? The challenge in OSHA and Ansi is it's not like other areas within our regulations, such as HAZWOPER, where we say specifically you have to go through 40 hours of training. Because if your exposures is only on a roof and you're only using a warning line system, then your training can be very, very minimal. But if you're on a construction site, like I'm sure many of you are on very vast construction sites where you have a variety of hazards, where you have some people working in the structure, some people putting on decking, some people putting on facade items, some people working in elevators, on stairs and things like that. You have all these different exposures. You obviously need to go through much, much more training. And so the way that I like to communicate the two items that are going to really affect how much training your workers need to go through is what's the variety and the number of hazards that you have in your facility. And so try to, when you do that assessment, you can identify what the variety and the number of the hazards that you have. And then the second factor is what kind of equipment are you using? What's the variety and how much of it do you have? Again, if you're using aerial lifts and then ladders, fixed ladders and portable ladders, and you're using personal fall protection equipment, and you're using not only lanyards, but self-retracting devices and ladder climbing systems and single point lifelines, the more variety of equipment that you have, the more training that you need to provide. And so while it doesn't come out to be a fixed number, you can see how, as those numbers increases, you need to think about those items. So that's just, hopefully I answered your question a little bit. There is more guidance in the Z350 9.2 standard, but hopefully I gave you some good thoughts on there.
You did. Well understood.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Thanks, I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
We had one question.
All right, yeah, we have just one question on the chat, but maybe you can take that. While we just we go over to the next agenda. So maybe you can take that. Should I read it out for you? Or?
Please read it. Yes, please read it. Yes.
Okay, so the question here was from Shitu saying, what is the rule on the two safety? Okay, he started by saying, thanks for the great breakdown of the presentation. One issue that still bothers me is as though we ensure all employees on harness or hook up their harnesses at the right point always. And then he further said, what is the rule on the two safety lines for safety harness? Is it compulsory now, or one safety line is it still, or one safety line is still permissible? Did you get that?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah. Yes. So thank you very much, Situ, for asking that question. So I need to go into a little detail to answer that question, and if we need to, clarify and have a follow-up conversation, to go in a little bit more detail, I'll be happy to do that. So as I talked about, we have what we call conventional fall protection, and then we have rope access. And for rope access, that's where you use the two safety lines. You have a primary and a secondary, and sometimes those lines switch, but you always have at least two lines connected to your full body harness for rope access. And so you always have that primary and you always have that secondary. So that's compulsory for rope access, and that's covered in that Z459.1 standard I talked about. Our OSHA regulations haven't gone into the detail for rope access like our Ansi standards have. Now, how do you translate that into conventional fall protection side? So think about it this way: if I'm doing window cleaning, or if I'm doing something on the facade of a building, and if I'm using a lowering system, I need to have those two line systems. That first one is a work position that lowers me into that work position, but then I have to have backup fall arrest in order to protect me. So if I'm doing something on the facade of a building or an area where I'm lowering myself, then you need to have those two systems. Now, say for example, I'm on a roof system and the roof is has proper strength, and I'm not worried about falling through the roof, but I'm worried about falling off the edge. Then at that case, the roof is your primary system, whereas in the rope access, one of the lines was providing your primary system. And then the fall protection system is your, what would be your secondary or your backup protection system. And so the two safety lines, slightly different in how we think about them. But the key to think about is that you always want to have a primary and you always want to have a secondary. And many times when you're using conventional fall protection, the primary system is the surface that you're standing on. And so that's an important item to keep in mind. And so that's why sometimes you just have a single anchorage line when you're already on a roof, and that roof provides enough strength. We're actually looking at coming out with an article with myself, somebody from Australia, Peter Ferguson, and somebody from the United Kingdom, David Thomas, and then someone else from the United States, Russell Duran, to clarify those items just to make sure that it's clear. So let me take one more example. If you're climbing up a ladder and you have a ladder climbing system, the ladder, since that's supporting your weight, would be the primary system, and then either the overhead anchorage or the ladder climbing system, safety system, would be your secondary system. So hopefully that clarified the differences between the primary and second. So what of a scaffold? So great question. So following up on what of a scaffold. So again, does that scaffold provide your primary support system as you're working on it? If it's properly decked, that would provide your system. Even if you might have a hole and you have a backup, fall arrest on in case you fall through that hole, that would still be the primary and the secondary for your fall protection system. But then taking that further, if the scaffold is green tagged, meaning that there are no hazards, no fall hazards on that scaffold, then you could use that scaffold without any fall arrest systems, as long as there's no holes that you could fall through, as long as there's no unprotected edges where there isn't a barrier on the scaffolding. And what we call that here in the United States, and I'm sure you have a similar term, we call that green tag scaffold. Then yes, you would not have to use personal fall protection equipment on that. So hopefully, Shatu, that answered, and please let me know if I can clarify anything else. Back to you, MD.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that was just spot on. Because of our time, I know a couple of other questions are coming in, but we'll try as much as possible to manage it, because we're supposed to end this meeting by 5:30 on the dot. It's supposed to be 1 hour 30 minutes. But some person, Shitu said thank you. What of scaffold?
Okay.
He further asked what of scaffold.
Great.
Let me just give you the last one, so you can just answer all together. Camille is saying, Tom, it's great to have you share your expertise with the Nigerian chapter. My question is, what is the best access area in our outer ring of the mast? Why I am assessing telecom mast on high-rise building. Did you decode that?
So,
or should I read it again?
Yeah, Camille, I might need to give you a picture of this to make sure that what I'm understanding what it is. But my understanding is you're talking about a telecommunication structure on top of a building and so forth. We have two different regulations over here that address this. For the fall protection equipment, it's our Z359 standards, but we also have what we call a TIA 222 standard. I think they're up to revision H for that, and that talks about specific to telecommunications work. And so both those standards would apply, and so I might not be able to completely address it, but I think I can address this. So what is the best access area, inner or the outer ring of the mast while I'm accessing the equipment? It really gets into what are you? I'm sorry. So it really gets into what are you using to support your body, and if you use that for the fall protection system, and then what are you tying off to? Where's your anchorage on there, and how do you know that it has the compatibility of the anchorage, and then also how do you know it has the proper strength? And that's where you have to use the two standards.
Hello, Mr. Thomas. Sorry, there's a lot of noise from the background. Please, if you're not speaking, please unmute yourself. Mute yourself. Sorry. Or I will just mute everybody so that maybe you can just mute Mr. Tom, please.
Okay. Sounds good. So,
please, Mr. Tom, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yep, I was sorry. So I would look to make sure that you have a proper system to climb the tower. And as far as the outer inner ring, I would need to see a picture to clarify that. And then where are you tying off to, and how's that compatible with the connector that you're using, whether it's a snap hook, and then also does it have the proper strength? So Camille, maybe you could send me a couple of pictures via WhatsApp or something like that, and we could exchange that way. Maybe have a video call if need be. But thank you very much. I know we're getting close to the bottom of the hour, so I'll hand it back to you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Festus and Mr. Camille, I can see your hands up. I guess that's the hand that that's you are, Mr. Festus. You asked the question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
thank you.
Please, can you just put your hands down so we're clear on that? Okay. Thank you very much. Once again, Mr. Then somebody was asking. Let me just take this one, Mr. Tom. Please, just a quick one. Someone was asking with respect to the certificate. I can't see that anymore. Oh,
I see that. Leila, maybe? Leia?
Oh, okay, fine.
That's the question.
Yeah, the person was asking where can they get this training and get the certificate. I guess you've
so some of the yes. So some of the training is available from the American Society of Safety Professionals for the Managed Fall Protection program. They provide that training. And then typically there is some training that's provided by our equipment manufacturers. So I'm not sure, if what manufacturers using our equipment, but over here we have 3M, we have MSA, we have Honeywell, we have a company called Faltech, and so they provide training to support their equipment. But sometimes it's very, very focused only on their equipment, but not talking about the procedures, the processes, the assessments and so forth that I talked about today. And so there isn't a uniform certification program except for that rope access that I talked about, and that's provided by IRADA and SPRAT within their systems. But you don't have to use their systems, but there's also other training that's available by training providers. That's something that we're looking at in the United States as far as how can we put some uniformity, some expectations on that. So when you look at different providers of training, you can have something a little bit more consistent. I know we're at the bottom of the hour, so I'll hand it back to the chapter leadership.
Thank you very much. That's well answered. Thank you so much. You've really done justice to the presentation today. For me, I learned a lot. Ladies and gentlemen on call, we're just going to do a small poll to know if actually you've learned something from this webinar. So I'm going to launch this poll. Just one question, just a quick one, just to know how you really appreciate this webinar. So please, you can see that on your screen at the moment. Please, can you answer it? So that we can. So the question is, did you get any new learning from this webinar? That's the question. And the two options are yes or no. So yeah, we just want to know the extent in which you learned something from this webinar. Okay, we can see about 8 persons have said something, and still on 100%. Everybody is saying yes, yes, yes. 100%. Mr. Tom, I can see you're smiling. That's good. So see 100%. Still 100%. The poll will still end. It's a 1 minute poll. So once it is 1 minute, it will just automatically end. Okay, still on 100%. Fantastic. 11 out of 11 saying 100%. Wow, that is awesome. 12. All right, so let me share the results.
Wow.
Please, can you stop sharing, Mr. Thomas, so I can share the result? Or can you see the result already? Can you see the result?
We have seen it already, 100%.
Yes, we are seeing it.
Oh, fantastic. That's fantastic. So it's 100%.
100%.
So, Mr. Tom, thank you so much. It just shows the amount of value you've transferred to us today. And we really, really appreciate it. We really, really appreciate it. God bless you. So at this point in time, it is our, thank you. It's our culture in ASSP that when we get resource persons to come and educate us like this, we issue certificate of recognition. And since our regional lead is on call, I'll just indulge him to help us do this presentation, to present the certificate of recognition to Mr. Tom. Sorry, let me just bring it up. A lot of things showing on my screen. All right, okay. So please, Mr. Camille, confirm that you can hear us and you're on call.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah, welcome.
So please do us the honor to present this certificate of recognition to Mr. Tom. Over to you, Mr. Camille.
Good evening, everyone, and everyone participating in this section. I'm happy to see we've been able to gain a lot of knowledge from the expertise of Mr. Tom Kramer. And on behalf of the chapter president and the entire executive and the entire participant at this section, I would like to take the honor to present this to you, a certificate of recognition of the value which you have provided for us as members of the Nigerian chapter and also in the Area 2 region of Region 9. And this is a certificate of recognition as a speaker, volunteer speaker today, navigating change in fall protection regulations and standards. I believe is a lot of value that you've added, and you've given us an opportunity, an eye-opener for us to have a thought on how to improve on this. Thank you very much. And I present this to you on behalf of everyone. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. It was an honor being with you today. Thank you very much for this. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Camille. Thank you so much, Mr. Tom. We really appreciate it. So at this point in time, we're about to wrap up. We'll just give just a few minutes to some of our executives to just give the last comments. Let me call on my delegate one just to give a brief comment about today's program. And then I call on my president-elect.
Yes, and Tom, I'm back again. Thanks so much. Why going through that, quite insightful, and a lot of the issues were flagged up, and especially for the new regulations and the new amendments that were made, and to see how well we can have a proper management of change processes in most of the organizations, especially to take a look. And another thing that I picked seriously is just dedicating a day in a year to say, okay, hey, let's look at our fall protection processes and policy, and to ensure that everybody is fully aware with that. The May 22nd, we can choose any other day, probably choose a significant day on which we have had an incident, but or something that we need to really call to bear. That is a lot of the takeaways that we plan to implement in our various work sites. Another thing I am taking away, and I am going to share with a lot of my colleagues and also share with leadership, is the idea to continuously remind ourselves and ask ourselves questions: what could likely go wrong? And the moment we keep repeating ourselves and repeating to ourselves exactly what are likely things, by the time you know what's happening, you're almost beginning to find some solution on what could go wrong. Thank you very much. I enjoyed every bit of that and a lot of insights you have put into it. On behalf of ASSP, Nigerian chapter, we say thank you for such honor done on this most important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, delegate. So over to you, our PE, President-elect Dr. Okando. Dr. Okando, confirm you're on call.
Hello, I'm on.
All right, please, over to you. Just quickly, just a brief comment about this webinar. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, a quick one. Our delegate one, Engineer Green, has just said my mind completely. So I don't have what else again than to say, Mr. Tom, thank you so much. I'm also in tune with Engineer Green. Thank you, and God bless you.
God bless you so much.
Thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you.
At this point in time, once again, I would like to say thank you on behalf of the Secretariat. Thank you so much for making our time to be here. The certificate will be sent to you via email through the Secretariat, and then we'll continue to communicate. So we're about to wrap up. Then I hand over the baton to my president to give the closing remark. Thank you very much.
Wow. All right. Thank you, coordinator and my secretary. It's a pleasure. Thank you all the participants that have attended this webinar. It's awesome. And to Mr. Thomas Kramer, let me tell you one thing. This name is a popular among the 36,000 members of ASSP globally. I'm telling you this. He is as popular as ice cream when it comes to OHS standard. So in that regard, let us continue.
Mr. President, you're trying to tell us that you like ice cream.
Who doesn't like ice cream? So, let us continue, as I said, to tap from the wells of wisdom. We really appreciate you, And we look towards even the next 3 webinars that we have, and you promise to take over amongst all those professional experts that are coming to join us. We really appreciate, and we look toward meeting you in Austin in the next couple of days. We really appreciate, and on behalf of SSP Nigeria chapter, we're gonna say thank you and God bless you. Thank you. And everyone who has attended, we appreciate you all. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So
I appreciate it.
Very much.
It's an honor.
Everyone.
God bless you all.
Yeah, thank you. So
Bless
Mr.
you
Tom,
all.
just hold on before we go. I would like us to just unmute our video and let's just take a group picture, please. Just
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
your video.
My coordinator, I have forgotten one thing. That for the public, these 3 webinars are coming up. And also, don't forget now, by September 4th, we have a Women in Safety Excellence coming up here in Nigeria. They are having their webinar. So please, for all of our members, let us join them and give them a hand of presentation to that session. We have a Women in Safety Excellence, and they are coming up with their webinar. That will be by 4th of September. We invite you, even Tom Kramer, to join next. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is noted. That is noted. So, Dr. Okada, I can see you. Is that Austin? You're looking fresh. I'm looking so fresh. I'm coming over to join you. Oh, Mr. George, thank you. I see you. Mr. President. I see you. So let me just take a group photograph of all of us. It's a form of documentation. All right, Abanu, I see you. Sir. I see you. So, Don, thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye.
My president, enjoy yourself.
My pleasure.
Well
How are
done.
you doing? Well done.
I'm okay. nice meeting. The
Well
secretary,
done.
that's nice.
I saw IPP has joined later, but it's just like people are putting.
Okay. Thomas, thank you very much for always being there. It's a great time, always giving us a lot. That's nice.
Wonderful.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. You're welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Nkandu, well done.
Enjoying, yes. Doctor, President-elect. You are enjoying yourself there. Over there. Well done.
Thank you. Well done. All right.
Why is
Bye-bye.
James Coker? I haven't seen James Coker here today. Is James Coker present here?
He was online.
Okay.
He was online.
Okay.
Yes, I saw him.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.